Okay, so if you've been keeping up with this Discworld retrospective of mine for a while now, then you probably know that I like to divide the whole series up into 5 eras, based around the general purpose, tone, and skill of each book. From The Color of Magic to Moving Pictures, we have the Genesis era, where Terry Pratchett was just getting started as a writer and still figuring himself out. And then starting with Reaper Man, we have the Golden Era, where Pratchett shifted the focus of Discworld away from simple parodies and towards deeper satire, which is what made the series such a mainstay in the fantasy community. That divide between the first 10 books and later books is pretty uncontroversial. It's generally agreed that Reaper Man was the start of a new surge of creativity with Sir Terry. Where things start to get more personal and subsequently more controversial is in deciding where the high-water mark of this creative wave lies. You probably have your own thoughts on the matter, but for me at least, Jingo is the last of the Golden Era Discworld books because it's the last Discworld book after Moving Pictures to feel truly innovative. Between this and The Amazing Morris, Pratchett seems to have reached a comfort zone that he rarely left. Now, in fairness, by this point he didn't have to leave it. Pratchett could write a banger novel in his sleep, and even at his worst he was still better than Drek like Xanth, so I don't begrudge him for getting somewhat complacent. However, it's with this book that Discworld's innovation ends, at least just for a little while. It's probably fitting that the last Golden Era book should be a City Watch novel. Guards is an outlier among the Genesis era romps, and the City Watch series stands out as among Pratchett's best. So, what is Jingo? Hey, so, remember that ancient civilization that was destroyed in the backstory of Moving Pictures? Well, it's suddenly popped up from beneath the sea, and by sheer coincidence, it's right on the maritime border between the city-state of Ankh-Morpork and the Kingdom of Klatch. Now, there's clearly only one thing to do in this situation, of course, and that's figure out a peaceful way to divide this new island. Oh, who am I kidding? It's war! It's war! Ankh-Morpork and Klatch are going to war, but Commander Samuel Vimes of the Ankh-Morpork City Watch smells a rat. You see, something's not adding up about the recent assassination attempt on the Klatchian envoy to Ankh-Morpork. And if Vimes can find the missing piece of the puzzle, then maybe he can stop this war before it gets out of hand. Or maybe wars don't start for reasons as simple as assassinations. Maybe the truth, whatever it is, won't really make a difference to the lords and generals who want to see this war continue. Still, Vimes has got to try, hasn't he? How does the world of Jingo work? Well, the first most obvious world-building aspect is the island of Leshp, which was briefly mentioned in Moving Pictures as a lost civilization, but which now has risen from the depths of the sea so that Ankh-Morpork and Klatch can fight over it. The idea of sunken islands resurfacing may seem like pure fantasy, but it's actually something that happens in the real world. Graham Island, for instance, is an island off the coast of Sicily that has sunk and risen no less than 4 times since the first records of the place, due to volcanic activity. And New Moor is a sandbar island that happened to emerge right on the border between India and Bangladesh, before sinking 40 years later. And yeah, sure, India and Bangladesh never went to war over it, but I think this was more a matter of them having bigger things to fight over than anything else. The other major location in Jingo is Klatch, which was visited back in Sorcery, but looks quite a bit different now. A part of this is simply that Pratchett takes his portrayal of foreign cultures much more seriously at this point. Even if there is the occasional joke at how weird and foreign Klatch is, a lot of the comedy has now shifted towards a more Mel Brooks, look how ridiculous racism is sort of comedy. The 71-Hour Ahmed, for instance, seems at first like the sort of racially insensitive parody Pratchett would have made in earlier books, but the more you get to know him, the more you understand that he's a lot cannier and subtler than he initially appears. And the majority of Klatchians are, for lack of a better word, perfectly normal, going about their daily lives just as all ordinary people do. This extends to one of the central subplots of Jingo, where the rise of anti-Klatch patriotism in Ankh-Morpork causes Klatchian families to be driven out of the city. Many of these families were born in Ankh-Morpork, and even those who weren't consider the city their home. But to the riled-up citizenry of Ankh-Morpork, a Clatchian is a Clatchian, and since they are now at war with Clatch, that means Ankh-Morpork must be purged of any and all things from Clatch. This of course proves far harder than expected, since just as much language, cuisine, and culture has been passed down from Clatch to Ankh-Morpork as has been passed down from the Middle East to England, but as Mel Brooks himself would tell you, no one ever said racism made any sense. This is all in pretty stark contrast with Pratchett's earlier treatment of Clatchians, where even if they lived in Ankh-Morpork, they were still too strange and different to ever really be a part of the place. Now though, Sir Terry very firmly rejects such narrow notions of nationalism, and takes every opportunity to mock those who still think along those lines. Perhaps the most notable example of this is Lord Rust. He had appeared previously in Men-at-Arms as one of the more reasonable members of the Ankh-Morpork nobility, but here in Jingo, he embodies the worst excesses and narcissism of said nobility. Pretty much every stereotype you can think of concerning highborn generals in World War I, Rust personifies. And sure, this is Discworld, so it's all played for laughs, but when Rust enters the picture, the comedy turns quite black. Because Rust is willing to throw away countless lives over the pettiest of matters. This of course leads to the question, what does Jingo have to say? Okay, so I don't think I'm alone in saying that this book hits different in a post-9/11 world. If anything, Jingo seems almost prophetic in the themes that it discusses, as they are all issues that we Americans still grapple with today in the shadow of the fallen Twin Towers. The first and most obvious message concerns the difference between the police and the military. When the war starts with Clatch, Ankh-Morpork has no standing army, and the first way Lord Rust and his ilk attempt to deal with this issue is by conscripting the services of the City Watch. After all, the Watch is basically structured like an army, all it needs is a change of purpose, and it'll be fighting fit. Vimes, though, refuses. The police, he insists, are not there to wage war, but to keep the peace, to uphold the law. And thanks to Vimes' efforts, the Watch sticks to its intended purpose and is not used to wage war. Of course, in our world, it didn't quite play out that way. American police were already becoming more militarized thanks to organizations like SWAT and movements like the War on Drugs. But after 9/11, the establishment of Program 1033 allowed police to acquire excess military equipment, and believe me when I say that during the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan, we had plenty of excess for them to use. In some ways, the fate Pratchett has Vimes avoid is less chilling than the reality that occurred, because rather than waging war against foreign combatants, our police now wage war against their own citizenry. And let's not forget the anti-Islam furor that spread across America, which resulted in a spike of hate crimes far more violent than any of those done to the Clatchian Ankh-Morporkians. Things may settle down in Ankh-Morpork after Jingo, but in our world, Islamophobia has created a cultural shift on the whole planet. Entire political parties and policies have been created to combat the supposed Muslim menace, and leading speakers call for the religion's entire extermination. Pratchett was prophetic in how easily people adopt this jingoistic hatred, and how easily they continue their daily lives without once considering how messed up it is to want the extermination of an entire group of people. Indeed, this is where the most quoted passage of Jingo comes from. It was so much easier to blame it on them. It was bleakly depressing to think that they were us. If it was them, then nothing was anyone's fault. If it was us, then what did that make me? After all, I'm one of us. I must be. I've certainly never thought of myself as one of them. No one ever thinks of themselves as one of them. We're always one of us. It's them that do the bad things. However, it's interesting to note that this is actually the second half of the full quote. The first half goes, "And then he realized why he was thinking like this. It was because he wanted there to be conspirators. It was much easier to imagine men in some smoky room somewhere, made mad and cynical by privilege and power, plotting over the brandy. You had to cling to this sort of image, because if you didn't, then you might have to face the fact that bad things happened because ordinary people, the kind who brushed the dog and told their children bedtime stories, were capable of then going out and doing horrible things to other ordinary people, which honestly makes the anti-Clatchian sentiment of the characters even more prescient, because it illustrates an important factor in post-9/11 hysteria. See, when you hear Islamophobic rhetoric, it isn't simply that Muslims are dirty and smelly and foreign, it's that they want to take over the world and destroy our way of life. There's this constant appeal to the supposed power of Islam, how it poses a threat not simply to our lives, but to our freedoms, our culture, our very existences. This is, of course, a rather tenuous idea. Leaving aside how the Muslim world is so racked with internal conflict that not even a successful pan-Arab state has ever emerged, it ignores the question of how Islam could destroy our way of life if we're so intent on keeping it around. And the way most Islamophobes get around this is by appealing to some abstract idea of elites, a shadowy cabal that is really behind everything and really pulls the strings on world events. It's important to remember how devastating 9/11 was to ideas of American invincibility. Suddenly, war could happen here, in our own backyard. And as with all devastating events, conspiracy theories abound and remain alive to this day. What really happened on 9/11? Well, some terrorists hijacked some planes and killed some people. But to many, that answer isn't enough. It's not enough that horrible things can sometimes just happen. It's much more comforting to imagine men in some smoky room somewhere, made mad and cynical by privilege and power, plotting over the brandy. At time of recording, it has been about a month since American troops pulled out of Afghanistan, finally putting an end to the Afghan War. Only time will tell how that conflict is judged once it enters the realm of history. But if Pratchett's final message in Jingo is any indication, not even that will be the end of things. Oh my dear Vines, history changes all the time. It is constantly being re-examined and re-evaluated. Otherwise, how would we be able to keep historians occupied? We can't possibly allow people with their sort of minds to walk around with time on their hands. Final verdict. Jingo is the end of an age. Even though I consider it a part of the Golden Era, there's this strange mechanicality that permeates the book. Like, Pratchett can so easily weave such a web of plots and juggle such an array of themes that he doesn't bother to put that extra dash of polish on the finished product. It's not as obvious as Pratchett's Silver Era slumbering, but it feels a bit sleepy, perhaps? And I'm sure you're all wondering, since I'd give Jingo an 8 out of 10, how bad things will be after this, but don't worry. The Silver Era may not be as great as the Golden one, but there are still fun times waiting for us. And just wait until you see what comes after that. In the meantime, I am Marc O'Keen, signing off, and I hope you liked this video. If you did, and you'd like to see me make more, please leave a like or comment down below, share my video via Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, or other means, and subscribe to my channel. Also, if you would like to help this channel out, I have a Patreon which you can contribute to via the link in the description. If you sign up, you will get sweet bonuses like an internet hug, early access to videos, and the ability to vote in polls to help me decide which works to cover next. Also, if I manage to get to 250 subscribers by the end of this year, that is 250 YouTube subscribers, by January 1st, 2022, I will play and stream Dragon Quest V for you all. Let's do this, people. Come on now. Help me out, please. Thank you all, and I will see you in the next one.